Good morning. This is the shortest distance, the shortest flight path between JFK Airport in New York and Shanghai Pudong. This one shows the shortest flight between Chicago and Beijing. This one is JFK to Hong Kong. At the top left corner of all these maps, that big brown thing, that's Russia. And imagine now you're a US airline like American or Delta or United, and you're not allowed to fly that way. You have to go around the big brown thing where Russia is. What's worse, all the Chinese and Korean and Indian airlines that you're in competition against, they can fly that way. They're allowed to fly over Russia, but you can't. You have to send your planes around, which adds hours to the flight. I can tell you too that if you're taking an American or European airline between these cities, it's not just longer and more expensive, but it's another stop, often a layover to just change planes. That's the situation facing our airline industry. Chinese airlines are grabbing market share against other global airlines, and the Russian airspace problem is a big part of the reason why. This report is from last year and focuses on the problems for US and Canadian airlines. The detours mean longer trips, more fuel, more labor costs, and higher prices for passengers. The best flight path between Canada and Southeast Asia, you have to go through Russia. And if you can't do that, it's a lot more fuel and a lot more cost. We can see the problems this poses for us. Air Canada is not allowed to overfly Russian territory, and their Vancouver-Hong Kong flight went up 41% in price over a few years ago. Toronto to Delhi, their prices are up 47%. However, the average cost of those flights industry-wide is down 22% out of Vancouver, and the global price increases out of Toronto aren't nearly as high as Air Canada's. That's because Chinese airlines, along with Korean and Indian airlines, are flying over Russia. So that fact gives foreign carriers a big competitive advantage over carriers from North America and from Europe. Just look at a map and you see the problem. Russia is enormous. It stretches across 11 time zones, and it's just no easy thing to go around. Chinese airlines don't have to go around. Flight radar shows us that China's got most of the airlines by country still overflying Russia, along with a handful from the Middle East and India. Here are some maps as to how this plays out for airlines and their travelers. Rerouting Helsinki to Bangkok adds an extra 3 hours, 13 minutes. Delhi to New York is another 90 minutes. Moscow to Cancun used to be under 12 and a half hours. Now it's 15. Frankfurt to Beijing. Here are two flights compared. Air China is 8 hours 35. Lufthansa, a German airline, is 10 hours 13. Seoul to Paris by Korean Air is 12 hours 14, and Air France is over an hour longer. If we multiply this over 2 years and thousands of flights and millions of passengers, now the entire global industry is changing, and Chinese airlines are taking market share away from everyone else who needs to avoid Russian airspace. British Airways just canceled its route from London to Beijing. Previously, it was one of British Air's most important and most profitable flights, but not anymore. Because of the airspace restrictions, the flight from London to Beijing takes 11 hours 30 and goes through the mountains between Russia and Iran. Air China and China Southern are allowed to go over Russia, and their flights are 2 hours shorter. They can take the shorter way, and even though the food is average and the passengers don't like the movies, they do like the shorter flight time. 2 hours shorter, and they like the lower prices. A China Eastern flight going the other way, Beijing to London, is 1,000 British pounds, and the British Air ticket is 59% more. Another problem for BA is that Air China just opened a new route from Gatwick, and so effective 26 October, British Airways is giving up on London-Beijing. The Chinese airlines are growing their international market share with a higher proportion of flights now compared to 2019, and it's growing. The Russian airspace issue is one of the biggest drivers. The US and Europeans have been banned from Russian airspace, and that means a big cost advantage for Chinese airlines, which translates into higher international market share. Chinese airlines have lower operating costs anyway, and now they have the advantage of flying fewer miles and for fewer hours. That means lower fuel costs, lower labor costs, less wear and tear on aircraft. They mention here the Beijing-London problem for British Air, which is 2.5 hours longer, and so they gave it up. Chinese carriers are growing fast now in their share of international air travel. These are monthly flights in thousands, Chinese and international carriers in red and blue. Chinese carriers have almost completely recovered from the huge global declines during COVID at largely the expense of international airlines who are barely back to half where they were previously. So to the original question, which is what you would do if you were in charge of a U.S. airline. Scott Kirby is CEO of United Airlines, and he wants Russian airspace banned for all carriers flying U.S. routes. So if your airlines serve the U.S. market, you're not allowed to fly over Russia. The U.S. has a ban on airlines flying over Russia. By the way, Russia did not ban U.S. airlines from flying over. The ban came from the U.S. government. But the ban does not cover foreign airlines that also serve the U.S. market. One of United's biggest problems with Russian overflight is their service to India. Air India flies over Russia, and United Airlines cannot. 3 years ago, United had 4 India routes, now just 1. Air India, meanwhile, is adding routes, going from 8 to 9. The biggest American airlines are asking Washington to ban new approvals and gates for Chinese planes. They say that U.S. carriers are at a disadvantage and that U.S. airlines will continue to lose market share in flights at the expense of our airline workers. Airlines for America is a trade union who signed the letter along with 2 pilot unions and the flight attendants union. Chinese airlines already operate with lower costs, and American planes need to fly around Russia, which makes the cost problem much worse. The European Union is still buying Russian oil and gas. They've just added a lot of intermediate steps and costs. Airbus is still buying Russian titanium to build aircraft. They're just buying through intermediaries that drive up the costs. The sanctions just created new markets and new profit centers for companies that can buy from Russia. Russia's energy industry is just too big. Its raw materials exports are too important for our supply chains to go around them, no matter what governments say. And now our airlines are facing a similar problem. Russia is too big to fly around. If you're going from anywhere in North America or Europe to anywhere in South Asia. And companies that fly over Russia are making money and taking market share from the companies that don't. This is Qingdao, Shandong. Be good.
Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Father, thank you for this precious brother who has come. Thank you for making him a man of integrity and honor and wisdom. Thank you for making him a brother. Empower him. Fill him with your Holy Spirit. Give him gifts of wisdom or of prophecy.